Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and we are counting down until opening day. Before we get into the video, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Even if your bracket is busted, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with a free Sweet 16 bracket and live betting on every remaining tournament game with the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to MLB, NHL, and MMA. BetOnline continues to be your number one betting source from every Cinderella story to every hat trick. BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, as I said, we are counting down till opening day. I am going to cover the last 2025 positional preview that is going to lead us into opening day, which is the Orioles outfield. So we're not going to do these separately and breaking them down independently. But we are going to do collectively the Orioles outfield just because there is overlap and guys probably will be shuffling around a little bit in the outfield, so it makes sense to speak about it together rather than as independent positions. So basically, the Orioles outfielders heading into opening day, we're going to have five. We are going to have Cedric Mullins, Colton Cowser, Ramon Laureano, Tyler O'Neill, and Heston Kjerstad. So that will be the five that is going to start the season with us on the Major League roster. Now, it is worth noting Ryan O'Hearn uh, might at some point get into the outfield over the course of the regular season. Um, don't know about that. And I think most Oriole fans should be hoping that he won't. But it is a possibility. And the other possibility, as of right now, with the current construction, is that Jorge Mateo might get some playing time in the outfield this year. Now, this was sort of the idea last year for the Orioles to sort of convert Jorge Mateo into a super utility player, being a guy that, of course, brings all the skills that he has to the game, but also increasing and expanding his versatility from just second base and shortstop as of now to also adding in some outfield positions, whether it be left field, whether it be center field. And even though the Orioles contemplated doing that, it was an idea even prior to him getting hurt toward the end of the regular season last year. Even prior to that point of him getting injured, it was sort of an idea that the Orioles had more or less stopped utilizing and seemed to have sort of abandoned. So it's a little bit of a question mark whether he might get a couple starts or a few starts or a defensive replacement out in the outfield at some point throughout the course of the season. But it probably, if he does make his way into the outfield, it probably won't be for any significant or meaningful amount of playing time, barring any sort of significant injuries. That sort of by need. I mean, I could see a situation where, for instance, perhaps Dylan Carlson doesn't do well in the majors and doesn't really work out. And I don't know, Tyler O'Neill or somebody, probably a right-handed hitting outfielder, probably goes down and Mateo gets utilized a little bit here and there. But I think it's something that we shouldn't expect for him to be in the outfield for any serious amount of time. Of course, he's injured right now. But I think, yeah, we shouldn't expect him to get any significant amount of playing time really in the outfield, even if he does make a couple appearances out there. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to sort of put O'Hearn and Mateo on the side a little bit, because, as I said, they won't get significant playing time out there. They probably won't be factored into the starting lineups from the outfield, especially on any sort of day-to-day basis. Yeah, I'm gonna sort of put them aside, but it is worth keeping in mind that either of those two, there is a possibility over the course of the season that they do make it into the outfield. Now, if we're turning to the remaining five that I had previously mentioned, again, Mullins, Cowser, Laureano, Tyler O'Neill, and Kerstad. For some reason, O'Neill's was the only player I said the first name of. But in any case, so out of those five, just sort of looking at it on the top, Fangraphs for one projects the Orioles to have at each outfield position this upcoming year to fall within, I think, the top nine for each outfield position, with, I think, right field being the weakest out of the three for the Orioles, which makes some sense given the loss of Anthony Santander over the offseason. So I think right field was the projection that they had being the weakest spot. But as far as left and center goes, they are, predicting for the Orioles to have a much better than above average outfield. If you're thinking about looking at these players, um, what the Orioles might lack in stardom, they definitely compensate for in depth, in versatility, in flexibility. I guess that's related to versatility, and solidity, I guess, is a good way to put it. All of these outfielders are solid at worst, with maybe the exception being Ramon Laureano. I would say potentially his floor is not exactly solid. But for the other ones, their floor probably is going to be a decent outfielder for the most part. So I think, even though the Orioles do not have any Juan Sotos or Aaron Judges out here in this outfield, that doesn't mean that the Orioles are not going to put together a very, very competent and potentially very effective outfield this upcoming year. So if I'm sort of looking at the outfield, there's sort of two X factors a little bit that stand out in my mind. I feel like we sort of talk about him every year being a bit of an X factor for the Orioles, but Cedric Mullins certainly, I think, falls into that category again. Now he's had 3 seasons at this point in a row where he's had relatively mediocre, uh, I guess, relative in particular to his 30-30 season. But in particular, offensively over the past 3 seasons, he has not salvaged anything better than a 721 OPS, which he had in 2022 and 2023. Now I'm just talking about offensively, of course. Defensively, he's still a very good outfielder, a very good center fielder. But overall, um, if we're looking at the offensive side, we saw, I guess, what Cedric Mullins is capable of. It's potentially debatable whether he is still capable of that or not even capable of that, but something resembling that sort of year. So I think it is up for debate, especially you're looking at this 3 seasons in a row. He's 30 years old at this point, which is sort of Potentially, if you, I guess, look at the peak or the yeah, I guess the peak years of a Major League Baseball player, and you sort of take the 4 or 5 on average best years of a Major League Baseball player, 30 would probably be on the tail end of that I guess that peak or your prime, I guess is the word I was looking for. It'd be sort of toward the tail end of your prime as a baseball player. So, um, having 3 seasons in a row with offensive performances under 730, 721 to be more specific. It is definitely a question whether Mullins could even uh, maybe not could, but whether he would be in a position to up his OPS to something 775 point 755. Oh my gosh, or above at this point in his career. Um, so yeah, it's sort of a little bit interesting to see, but if he really does pull off a much improved offensive performance, and especially this year, we expect that Mullins won't be hitting. He struggled for quite a while now at this point, hitting against left-handed pitching. So we're not even asking him to produce that much, even against lefties. um, we really just want to take full advantage of his offensive capabilities when he's hitting against righties in the lineup, which is going to be probably the bulk of his performance. And as I said, defensively, overall, he's going to be more or less the everyday guy that goes out there for the Orioles in center field. He's not probably going to get most starts against left-handed pitchers. So in those situations, he will probably start the game on the bench, potentially come off the bench toward the end of the game as a pinch hitter. When the starting pitcher has been pulled, maybe there's a righty on the mound. You need him to pinch hit in the ninth. He's definitely a guy in a situation like that you might look to, especially with a right-handed closer on the mound, or a right-handed reliever on the mound. But overall, when a lefty's on the mound, I think it's more or less fair to assume that most of the time he is going to be starting on the bench, or maybe I should phrase it as not starting, and he will be sitting on the bench. Um, so overall for Cedric Mullins, though, I do think he sort of comes into being the X factor a bit for this team, especially not for the whole team necessarily, but a bit of an X factor for the outfield, because a really solid offensive performance from him could do a lot for the Orioles offense if he also potentially, like, okay, we could probably guess that even an offensive outburst for Mullins this year, he might not even hit 2 or 3, or I'm sorry, 1 or 2 in the lineup. I think that's pretty more or less fair to assume at this point. But even if he was not the 9 hitter and he turned into the 6 hitter or the 7 hitter and got that many more at bats over the course of the regular season, and by extension, was performing well against right-handed pitching, and was doing really well offensively. Um, that would make such a big difference for the Orioles. And then the Orioles could put another hitter who is not performing as well further down in the order. That's more or less how batting orders work. And the Orioles could put someone who's not hitting lower in the lineup, um, so that to sort of take the pressure off them, to reduce their workload offensively, coming up to the plate and stuff like that. So I think that Cedric Mullins if we're looking at who sort of is a little bit of a variable, I think he's one of the guys you can look at. Now, arguably, offensively over the last few seasons, he's been somewhat stable. I mean, he's had right around a 710 to a 721 OPS in all 3 years. He's, 16, 15, and 18 home runs from 22 to 24. He had 34 stolen bases in 22 and 34 in 2022 and 32 in 2024. 19, he dropped a bit in 2023. Um, but overall, so he's sort of been stable, but I do think that there is some possibility that he could sort of, especially if he is having a reduced workload, could potentially like produce something offensively that is a bit better than we've seen over the past 3 years, even if it is not the 30-30 season that he had with the Orioles. So yeah, Cedric Mullins is one of the guys that you sort of look to as being, I think, one of the sort of more variable people in the lineup. He has had offensive struggles, so I think there is even a possibility that he could decline, unfortunately, even more than sort of his last 3 seasons have been. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, that is sort of why I'm coming to the analysis that he is one of the more variable or less predictable offensive performers for the Orioles this upcoming year. I think Ramon Laureano, if you're looking at the second guy, is also sort of in that same situation. Now, Laureano had a good stretch to end the season last year. The Orioles were sort of banking a lot on that for this year and hoping that he had sort of figured something out in order to then continue and do well for the Orioles this year. Um, with that said, I think that, it's sort of fair to assume that Laureano is one of the guys that might um, potentially, I mean, I think that a lot of baseball fans who can remember that he was a really talented, really, really talented player when he was at his peak, more or less, in his career. Similar to Mullins, he's also 30 years old. And over the past 3 seasons, it's sort of been similar. In 2024, he did have a 748 OPS, but the 2 seasons prior to that, he didn't have anything above a 675. So and the 748 OPS, it should be said, was in even more limited plate appearances. Um, since 2022, he hasn't hit anything more than uh so he had, yeah, sorry. So he had 404 plate appearances in 2023. That fell to 309 in 2024. For a while, he's not been an everyday hitter. And sort of for the Orioles this year, he's not going to be an everyday player for the Orioles. He is going to be in the lineup predominantly when there are lefties potentially coming off the bench as a pinch hitter or defensive replacement, given the best matchups or the favorable matchups for the Orioles. But overall, I do think at the end of the day, Mullins is more of an X factor than Ramon Laureano, or the difference that Mullins will make. And this should not be like surprising anybody. But because Mullins is going to have a much larger workload than Ramon Laureano throughout the course of the year, I do think it is important that it is sort of noted that Mullins and his performance this year will have a significantly more larger impact, a significantly larger impact than whatever variable difference Ramon Laureano has in his performance offensively. Um, Now, sort of defensively, I think I've spoken about this before. It's a bit complicated with him defensively. On one hand, he has a stellar arm, and on the other hand, he is really, really bad range wise. Part of that is his age. He's had injuries, stuff like that over the course. He's never been the fastest player in the league. But so he's a little bit of um, a contrast in his skill sets um, in terms of his defense. So I think Ramon Laureano. I mean, there definitely is a possibility that Kerstad, is sent to AAA at some point. But I think if we're looking at the five outfield guys, even though Laureano was signed for a decent amount of money, I do think that there is um, out of the five outfielders we have, he is the most likely to not be an Oriole by the end of the season. He very well could be. That's possible. But I think if you're looking at the five that we have, he's the one that's most likely not to be. Um, so yeah, that's just sort of talking about the X factors. I mean, I think there is going to be um sort of similar to how there was last year. There is going to be a lot of weight for Colton Cowser this upcoming year. He really did have a big impact for the Orioles last year. He's of course very young, still developing as a player. Um, and we just basically, want him to keep improving and to build on the good season that he had last year. And if he does that, that would be tremendous service to the Orioles. Um, so yeah, last year he had 24 home runs. I think most people are aware Cowser is a guy that is certainly capable of being a 30 home run hitter. In addition to that, the other really significant comment I think that stands out about him is that he played last year in 153 games, of course, out of the 162 that are total in the regular season. Um, Cowser is a really, really going to be an important part of this outfield. I don't think for the most part, I don't put him as much in the X Factor category because I think more or less we have some idea of what we are going to be getting from him this year. So I don't think there's a ton of variability in how he's going to perform. But with that said, he is going to play a tremendous, tremendous role for the Orioles this year. He will probably be in the starting lineup almost every single day for the Orioles. When there is a righty on the mound, it will be Mullins in center and him in left, more likely than not, followed by Kerstad, most likely in right. And when we have a righty on the mound, I'm sorry, when there's a lefty on the mound, as I sort of referenced before, Mullins is going to take a seat, and it's going to be Colton Cowser. That is the guy most of the time that is going to slide over and play defense in center field for the Orioles. Now, Defensively, he's great. That's why he can play center field. He is going to switch. I think we're going to see him very, very. Uh, it won't be an equal distribution of him between center and left. He will probably by the end of the year get more time playing time in left field than center field, because Mullins will be playing most of the time. But with that said, he will get a fair share, sort of similar to how we did last year. He will get a sizable amount of the playing time in center field as well, which really works well for the Orioles. Now his splits, the reason why he's going to be starting over Mullen is his splits, lefty righties, are not nearly as um, negative, I guess is a way to say it, as Mullins's are. He hits lefties better than Cedric Mullins does. So that's why he will get the starting role, and he will be the one in the lineup against lefties. Um, yeah, but Cowser, I think an injury to Cowser for the Orioles for any sort of extended period of time could create some issues for them in the outfield. And I think the outfield was sort of constructed with it in mind that Cowser could play each of the corner positions. I think that's sort of why, not each of the corner positions, he could play any position, but left or center. I think that is why sort of the Orioles felt at liberty to sort of focus so heavily on platoons, get somebody like Tyler O'Neill, get somebody like even Laureano, but get someone, I'm more thinking about O'Neill, that, really, really has a big difference in the splits. So I think that's something really to think about. I mean, O'Neill will probably get in the lineup a good amount against righties as well. But with that said, um, uh, I mean, the reason O'Neill is so, I think, was attractive to the Orioles in the offseason is because he mashes against left-handed pitching. Yeah, I think even with potentially yeah, I think that O'Neill he might even slide over to right if there's a right-handed, I'm sorry, if there is a right-handed pitcher on the mound, there is some possibility. Of course, DHing is an option for him, but if something is not favorable in the matchup, potentially with Kerstad or something like that, there is a possibility. I think that he could take his place in a situation like that, depending on what the matchups are. But most likely, in a situation with a righty on the mound, Tyler O'Neill will probably spend a good amount of time DHing for the Orioles. Um, all right, so moving on to Heston Kjerstad. So yeah, he is yeah, he's going to mainly occupy right field for the Orioles. I think that Oriole fans, he has sort of been consistent um, over the course of the 2024 season. He definitely sort of established himself as serviceable, and more or less worthy of a major league roster spot for the Orioles. So, I mean, defensively, he's not spectacular. Um, yeah, he just sort of he's there for his bat. He does have a good arm, but overall, yeah, the Orioles have him, hopefully for what he'll be able to do offensively. I think there is, some possibility at some point. I mean, his name has been floated for a while of being a trade candidate. I think that at some point that is possible. because he clearly has potential. I mean, he had a horrific injury, as we all know, that really sidelined him and stunted his development for quite a while. But with that said, there probably is, he was a top draft pick. There is a lot of possibility that this is a guy who could really um, find something. And he is still at the age of 26. So there is still a good possibility that he is somebody who ends up. Becoming a really, really good hitter in Major League Baseball. And that could definitely still happen. Yeah, over the past couple of seasons, he really didn't get enough playing time to really sort of establish himself. And we'll see how much he gets this year. I think that is a little bit of a question mark. And I think it does sort of depend on his performance and the performance of the guys around him, which, should be more or less intuitive. Um, but I think he is, when righties are on the mound, potentially he is going to have the edge to be, more likely than not, he will be starting in the outfield. In right. So, yeah, Kerstad, I mean, he's an interesting guy. I mean, he definitely is. I mean, we've seen him hit the ball really, really hard. He's hit for power. And in order for him to really become the sort of player, where he's going to be valuable, to a team in Major League Baseball, his power really has to shine at the major league level. And he hasn't really had much of an opportunity to sort of have that consistency at the major league level to show whether or not he's capable of that. He's shown he can hit the ball far. But beyond that, this is a guy who is not going to be adding a lot defensively. And as far as contact, speed, he's not really, we're not thinking about him. He's not the guy that is going to hit 300. He's not going to bunt for base hits, etc. Even though he is decently fast, his game does not revolve around his speed. So, in order for him, especially being a corner outfielder, um, if especially if you're not great defensively, you really do need to establish yourself as a really good power hitter, and that's sort of like the next step that he has to sort of put together. Which is sort of it's interesting because I think just thinking about his time in the majors, I think it sort of seems as if you know, we've seen more of the contact abilities that he has, more so than the power abilities. And, in the long run for him, the contact is really not what's going to make him become an effective Major League Baseball player. So he really, I think the Orioles need to see him really start turning on some baseballs, hitting for power, potentially even hitting, the opposite field. He had 4 home runs last year. They were more or less all to center, maybe slightly right center field. Um, but yeah, I think the Orioles, in order for him to grow, he really is a guy that needs to start hitting for power and establishing himself as a power hitter, in order to stay in the major leagues in the long term. So, yeah, that's sort of, yeah, and I guess I can, I guess I didn't really hit on O'Neill that much. Yeah, Tyler O'Neill, of course, coming off, a very, very solid, season, in Boston. He hit for an 847 OPS, which is great. That's going to put him somewhere in the middle of the Orioles lineup most of the time. had 31 home runs. So he will definitely be in the lineup most days for the Orioles. Um, as I was mentioning earlier, he does have significant splits, and I can just demonstrate that. So, yeah, yeah, very significant splits. So last year when there were right-handed pitchers on the mound, he had a 693 OPS, 15 home runs, 32 RBIs. Yeah, I mean, the 15 home runs is solid, especially in 283 at bats. But the rest of the number 693, he had 110 strikeouts. That's not good. But if you look at the left-handed pitching, he hit for a 1,180 OPS, 16 home runs, in, maybe um less than half. So he hit the same number of home runs against he hit one more home run against lefties than righties, despite having less than half the at bats. So that right there says a lot about how he is. I think the Orioles are going to try to exploit his platoon splits as much as they possibly can. He's not fast, so he's not going to really do a lot on the bases for the Orioles. I mean, he will get something probably over the course of the regular season, but in terms of he's not a speed demon. He's not going to make significant impact on the base paths. So yeah, so that's sort of Tyler O'Neill's deal. He is okay against righties. Perhaps even mediocre, is fair to say, against righties. And he mashes lefties, and that's really what it comes down to for him. And that's sort of why the Orioles got him, and that's sort of why, um, yeah, he is an Oriole right now. I think the Orioles signed him to a 4-year deal. And but Tyler O'Neill does have an opt out after this season. So I do think sort of the Orioles are viewing that as a win-win situation. If he ends up opting out at the end of the season, then he clearly put together a really great year for the Orioles. And then we'll sort of go back to the drawing board and figure out the outfield next season. Um, but definitely, whenever there is a left-handed pitcher on the mound, you can expect Tyler O'Neill to be written into the starting lineup. That is a guarantee, uh, barring him being on the injured list or about to be on the injured list. You can guarantee you will find his name there. So, yeah, the Orioles, yeah, as I was referencing before, Fangraphs really does expect the Orioles to have a really good outfield solidity from all three outfield positions this coming year. We are going to be heavily benefited by being able to platoon, more or less. We don't have a Soto that is going to hold down one outfield position every single year. The Orioles are really going to mix and match, slide people, shuffle people around, that sort of thing in order to make this thing work. But because of their ability to do that, because the sort of roster is designed in this way, to be flexible and to be versatile, the Orioles should have a good year coming up for the Baltimore Orioles. So, yeah. All right. So yeah, that about wraps it up for the Warehouse podcast. I paused there because as I was getting to the end of this video, I got really scared that I never hit the record button. It's been a while since I've done this, so I sort of panicked for a sec and I was like, did I not hit record? Because if I didn't hit record, everything would be messed up. But I did. So it's okay. Um yeah, there's no catastrophe for myself a few days before opening day in terms of the podcast. So that's good news. So it's been good to be back. I know it's been a long time since I personally have been on this show. I'm okay. It's not really about that. It's more just about responsibilities, and I've been consumed with other areas of my life. So that's why it's been so long since I've been here, but I am trying to be back on a more regular basis. In any case, thank you all so much for listening. Feel free to follow the show. Give us a 5-star rating and review. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Um, we do have a YouTube channel. If you have any thoughts that you want to share, feel free to comment with your thoughts. If you have any thoughts on opinions, analysis, etc., that's the place, the forum to do it. We normally respond, and maybe other people will respond too, hopefully. Feel free to email the show, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at the Warehouse Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. We are counting down to opening day, and I am excited. Yeah, but thank you all so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.